Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the first event of our COP26 Climate Action Marathon presented by the Common Energy Impact Team. My name's Natalie. I'm coming from Ute Arapaho land in Denver, Colorado, and I've been working with Common Energy for about a year and a half. Just for some context here, Common Energy is a community solar subscriber management organization, and the Impact Team is our youth-centered collective of clean energy advocates. The purpose of this COP26 Climate Action Marathon is to promote discussion about our upcoming United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow, and also to increase awareness about climate mitigation strategies that we can do at home. The majority of this conference will be rooted in group discussion around our topic, and around 3:45 Eastern Time, we're going to jump into a brief discussion about our work with community solar. So in the meantime, really happy to have you all here. Really excited for our discussion today. Lauren is going to send a form in the chat just so that we can help keep track of attendance. So if you're able to fill that out, that would be super helpful for us. Today, we're going to be discussing past climate agreements, inequities, and the challenge of COVID-19. This is the first event in our 4-part series, and we hope to provide some necessary context and background information for our folks who might not be as familiar with climate conferences. We have an incredible panel to join us for this conversation, including Reagan Richmond from the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, Stephen Bay from EarthUp, and Alvaro Alfaro Morales from Care About Climate. Because I want to leave ample time for our group discussion, I'm going to move fairly quickly through these next few slides, so I apologize if I'm talking a little fast. First up, just to go through a brief outline of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to go through some basic what you need to know about international climate conferences. We're going to go through some important sessions, the impact and equity of those. And then we're going to jump into our panel discussion, which I'm really excited about. And then we're finally going to close up with a brief discussion about how community solar is a climate mitigation strategy. Starting out with some basic background in international climate conferences, these are organized by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was established in response to the first report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1990, which is a convergence of scientists who basically recommended that we reduce our carbon emissions by 60% compared to current 1990 levels. COP is an acronym that stands for Conference of Parties, and this is an annual event where global leaders gather to discuss climate action and emissions reduction strategies. So I'm going to go through some of the most important COPs over the past 27 years and to provide some context as to where we stand going into our next conference. Starting out, as I said, I'm going to go through as quickly as possible. Starting out, we have our third COP, which was held in Kyoto, Japan, and resulted in the Kyoto Protocol. This is the first ever international climate treaty, which is very exciting. However, the goals within the Kyoto Protocol were not really that ambitious. And there were no real action items that were legally binding. So even though this agreement was not extremely aggressive, it was still really difficult to even get it ratified. There was an extended period between 1997 and 2005 where really powerful organizations, businesses, and the US government kind of fought back against the Kyoto Protocol. So it wasn't ratified until 2005. So this is just kind of an introduction to all of the lashback that we're going to see moving forward into these climate discussions of the next few years. Next up, the next conference I want to talk about is COP15, which was held in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2009 and resulted in the Copenhagen Accord. So the Copenhagen Accord was a little bit more impactful than the Kyoto Protocol, had some more finer details ironed out, such as limiting our global warming to 2 degrees Celsius with a preferred limit of 1.5 degrees. And also establish some financial mechanisms to assist in this. However, there's still no legally binding actions to reduce global emissions. This is a quote from Stephen Leahy, who is the author of Climate Change History Was Not Made, basically saying that there's this huge divide between rich and poor countries, that we don't have enough action items from the industrialized countries in order to mitigate climate change and support nations of the global south who will be most severely impacted by climate change. Moving forward into our next conference, this is COP21, which was held in Paris, France in 2015. This resulted in the very well-known Paris Agreement, and it's kind of been the foundation for all the COPs after this. So what's really important about the Paris Agreement is that we finally established these nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Within this agreement, we also have a 5-year accountability cycle for nationally determined contributions, meaning that every 5 years, the countries who are participating in the Paris Agreement have to kind of reassess their contribution to climate mitigation strategies and emissions reduction. So as this conference was in 2015, 2020 would have been the year to kind of have this deadline for our NDCs. However, obviously, because of COVID-19, this was postponed, and we're going to be revisiting our nationally determined contributions in this upcoming event, COP26. Although the Paris Agreement did set some, tangible goals for climate mitigation, it's still not enough, especially considering accountability. So this is a quote from Titi Gemisola Asoka from the Center for 21st Century Issues in Lagos, Nigeria, essentially saying that there's not enough accountability from industrialized nations to support the people, majorly women of the global South, who will experience deeper dives into poverty as a result of climate change. Finally, the last COP that I'll be talking about today is COP25, which is held in Madrid, Spain. This, I guess, could be seen as the most inclusive and equity-centered COP, but it's still not enough. We do have some new mechanisms in place to address equity, such as the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, the Gender Action Program, and others. This is also dubbed the Blue COP to kind of represent that there was more actions around oceans and coastal communities. And we also have the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is the United Nations framework led by Canada and some other countries to reduce fossil fuels globally. However, we still have some major blockages from the United States government, also from India, China, and Brazil. This is a quote from Alden Mayer from the Union of Concerned Scientists, essentially saying that there's this still a total disconnect between what the science and people demand in terms of climate mitigation and what these negotiations are actually delivering. So as we can see, these past climate conferences have been pretty disappointing from what we need. And it's kind of frustrating for nations of the global South who are in immediate crisis and not receiving the necessary support from the United States government and other industrialized nations who have essentially caused the climate crisis. So quickly moving forward, just to talk about urgency of our upcoming COP26 conference. It's being called the world's last best chance to get runaway climate change under control, which is a really powerful statement. This is because of a lot of different reasons. So including the fact that this is the 5th COP since the Paris Agreement. As we talked about, we're going to be revisiting these nationally determined contributions. We also have more data from the IPCC, who released their most recent report this summer, the 6th assessment, essentially laying out our future of the next 30 years with climate change. We also see COVID-19 as an obvious challenge and possible opportunity moving forward within climate negotiations. Before we get into our group discussion, just wanted to go through these quotes from Tasneem Essop, who is the Executive Director of the Climate Action Network. So Tasneem in this quote is saying that COP26 will be a moral and practical test for all of our global leaders to see if they're willing to take action to save our future. This next quote from Tasneem Essop is related to COVID-19, essentially saying that this challenge, this global pandemic, will be exacerbating the already existing inequalities within previous COP conferences. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our featured panel speakers for this event. First up, with 14 years of experience in the sustainability field, Reagan Richmond has a diverse and impactful work portfolio. She's worked with utilities, local government, nonprofit organizations, and startups to support the development of sustainable solutions with a focus on equity and accessibility. Reagan has led strategic initiatives within the New York Power Association to advance the culture of innovation to meet New York's decarbonization goals. She is a fellow at the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, a clean energy strategist, and adjunct professor teaching sustainable business strategy at Hofstra University. Next up, Stephen Bay is a sustainability entrepreneur through and through. His entire career has been focused on developing solutions to decrease carbon emissions and reduce the effects of global climate change. Stephen is now the CEO of EarthUp, a startup based in the Pacific Northwest that provides a comprehensive platform for sustainability departments of any size to engage their employees with content that improves employees' lives while also serving the organization's ESG efforts. Finally, last but not least, Alvaro Alfaro Morales is a sustainability professional from Casablanca, Valparaiso, Chile, where he teaches environmental values with a focus on environmental policy. He's also pursuing a master's degree in international relations with the Catholic University of Valparaiso, where he's completing his thesis focused on the effectiveness of the Paris Agreement in Latin American countries. He is currently working with an NGO called Care About Climate, which provides pathways to global youth to participate in climate advocacy and increase awareness to international climate networks, education, and training. Alvaro is currently preparing for his upcoming participation in COP26 as a negotiator representing the interests of the Chilean civil society. So thank you so much all for your participation. We're so happy to have you here. And I'd love to kick off our discussion with our first question. Considering the information I just presented, what kind of lessons do you think we should learn from our climate agreements of the past?
I think I've unmuted. Happy to hop in, Natalie. Thank you. Yeah, I would say one of the most important lessons that we continue to learn from our climate agreements in the past is that we absolutely have to center the voices of the folks that are impacted first and worst throughout this. And that, as you mentioned before in some of this historical overview you gave, that it's really important that we're recognizing the privilege and responsibility of our wealthy industrialized nations and ensuring that we create the space and really commit resources appropriately. That has kept us from reaching important agreements or engaging critical voices in past COPs where we've seen important delegations walk out even on the conversation because their voices were not adequately lifted up by those that had the privilege and power to do so. And I'd say we've known also that this was critical from the very beginning, right? The principles of environmental justice were established in 1991. They were brought and they were circulated in 92 at the Rio Earth Summit, which opened up or pave the pathway towards COP. So this is nothing new, so to say, but that we have to continually remind ourselves that we need to center these principles of environmental justice in the work that we're doing as a collective.
Thank you so much, Reagan. Stephen or Alvaro, do you have any additional comments here?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Thank you. So we have almost 50 years from Stockholm meeting, so 50 years of inaction. I think we need to learn that these diluted solutions that we have in the past, we could not have them anymore. It's like we have so small solutions over all this year, almost 50 years, and already 5 years from the Paris Agreement. And these are just small steps, and we are still going to the sixth massive extinction. We are still going to lose a lot of land, a lot of poor people houses that are always more affected than other people houses. And this is very dangerous because if we stay in this path, we are just showing that we are not doing nothing for the future generations. So we are, for me, the lesson from the past is we need to stop to do small steps, because these small steps are even not stopping the climate change, not reducing the climate change. They are just declarations of good intentions that don't lead us to a solution.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. The other thing that we've kind of done and what's led to a lot of inaction is it's been focused on federal governments. And so when you have federal governments going up there, they don't really have to be held accountable, right? There's no way to really hold them accountable. And something that's actually been extremely exciting for me recently is in the last 18 to 24 months, there's been a real paradigm shift. And so you're looking at where the money goes. And big investors like BlackRock, like PIMCO, are now saying we are only going to invest in companies that are reporting on ESG metrics, and not just reporting on ESG metrics, accelerating them. And so for real action and to take real action to happen, it's not these commitments that we're making that actually there's no way for us to actually hold anybody accountable if they fall short of these commitments, which is kind of what seems to have been done the last 50 years or so. You need to actually, the companies that are best at solving the world's problems or scaling solutions, right? The Apples, the Microsoft, all these companies, how do you get them to align with solving the climate crisis? How do you get these big businesses that have made billions or trillions of dollars on actually executing and finding a problem and solving that problem and get them aligned? And I really think that alignment has taken shape in the last 18 to 24 months. You're starting to see the chief investment officer, PIMCO, is now leading a UN ESG task force of chief financial officers for a lot of these big companies. And there's still a ton of greenwashing going on. But the lever that has really changed and what really gives me a lot of hope for the future is that we're removing it from the federal government. And we're saying these big companies actually can solve these problems. But in order to hold these big companies accountable, we do need government, but we also need individuals, right? We need individuals to say, I'm only going to support companies that align with my values. I'm only going to work for companies that align with my values. If you are buying products from companies that don't support your values, you need to stop. Because these investors and where these companies get money and their share price and all the things that they're incentivized for, the boards, the executive teams, everything that incentivizes them is money, right? And if you stop giving them money, they change. If you continue to give them money, they won't change. And those are the same companies that influence the politicians that are supporting campaigns. And so if it's in the vested interests of companies to actually solve these problems, and it makes the executives more money and it protects the investment of a lot of these investment firms, to me, it takes away the talk and it starts to bring it to action. And all we've seen in my lifetime is a lot of talk about these things and not a lot of action on these things. So that's, if I take away one lesson, it's we can't rely on a federal government. We need to rely on individuals. We need to rely on local governments. We need to rely on companies. And we need to make sure that all of them are aligned with solving this problem. And the federal government needs to make policies that hold companies accountable. And the SEC in the United States recently came out and said, hey, we're actually going to be tracking these metrics. We're going to making sure if you're making a 2040 climate commitment that we're going to be following up before 2040 to make sure you're making that commitment because it's increasing the share prices. So I think the mechanisms are happening, but I think, and also one last piece before I stop talking, but one last thing is federal government leadership changes, right? Trump gets elected, we pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. You know what I mean? So you see these things that happen. We can't trust federal governments to solve these problems. We need a systemic change. And that really starts with individuals and it really starts with the companies and how to incentivize them.
Absolutely. I fully support all of those answers. I think those are really great. And I love the, different perspectives that we're all coming at this from. I think that's really cool. Moving forward into our next question related to, the past 18 to 24 months, as Stephen was talking about, COVID-19, this global pandemic, has presented its fair share of challenges and difficulties within the public and private sector and has caused some major delays in climate action, such as the delay of COP26. So how can we see the issue of COVID as both a challenge and an opportunity within international climate action? Alvaro, go ahead.
Yes, that was so. I think COVID-19 shows a lot of stuff. One thing is that multilateralism sometimes fail and fail hard. In this case, multilateralism was absent, like very absent of the conversation, of the table. The World Health Organization was discoordinated. The countries were not hearing to them. Some countries, some leaders, they were saying, oh, this is a hoax, and you could not force people to wear masks and stuff like that. I saw in the news, for example, the US, I traveled to the US during the pandemic due to some familiar stuff, and I see there people talking in the street saying, oh, the president said, and this is not real, so I'm not wearing a mask. So I think we could see something that leadership is very important on this, and it's a challenge to have good leaders due to COVID, but also to climate change. I think some stuff as the health, also as climate change, it need to be a politic of the state and not just from the government. This kind of the organization of the state and not just the government that is exerting power in one period, 4 or 8 years, depends on the country, wherever. But we need to set all of this as a state politics, federal politics, and not policies, sorry, and not just in the government politics. That I think is one stuff. And the challenge of COVID-19 was at the beginning, just the countries fighting themselves, each other with against other countries because of masks, because of ventilators or lungs respirators, whatever you want to call it, and later for the vaccines. And the vaccines also are a really big challenge because the bad leaderships, for example, in Latin America, proved to be very dangerous to people's health. We have good leadership in Chile. Then today I take my third shot on COVID. And in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, people is not even taking the first or the second shot yet. So this proved that a lot of problems in Argentina and Brazil because of the governments. They don't receive the vaccines because they were against the vaccines, because they were saying that the pandemic was not real. So a big challenge is to improve the multilateralism in this kind of stuff, but also to improve the government to have these as policies of the state and not just for the government. And I think the opportunity of COVID-19 is that a lot of companies went down, or they reduced their participation in the market or in the industry, they reduced their production, and now they are going to start to rebuild these businesses. I think the biggest opportunity in the COVID and climate is that these companies need to build back greener, build back better, build back with more investments on clean energy, in clean production, in responsibility of their productions later for recycling and for taking the products away. So I think this is the biggest opportunity, is opportunity to the companies that even almost disappear to build back in a greener way. You could not have the same again, because also climate crisis is very connected with all these diseases, pandemics, and stuff like that. The climate change is spreading malaria, is spreading Ebola, is spreading other diseases because of the because insects are more spreaded because of climate change and stuff like that. So it's time to connect everything, but as a state policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And from other panelists?
Yeah, let's say I absolutely agree with Elvar. That's about how we build back in a more intentional way as we come in. When I think about the both challenges and opportunities, one of the things I share often about work in climate and sustainability is that it requires us to really embrace paradox in order to be able to see the full system of solutions that we have at hand. And the challenge and opportunity of COVID is absolutely one of those moments where we're embracing the paradox of this, right? We've been through and continue to move through a horrible time globally. But with that, we also, there were things that we saw that, really challenging, but also in some ways beneficial. We saw that through collective action, we can make, things better for our communities. It's really about how do we actually get to that agreement and collective action together. We saw that in wealthy countries that we did see certain emissions drop, and that shows that, we obviously don't want to go through the same kind of actions that led to that emission drop during this time, but just showing that we have the ability to make collective decisions together that help us to achieve our goals in that way. But there are also a lot of challenges, right? We saw that climate action in other ways was completely delayed. In the US, a number of large renewable projects were stalled because we didn't have access to the supply chains. And I think where I'm going with this most of all is that we can recognize, just how fragile and resilient we are at the same time, and that everyone's learning from this, that we don't want to be in this place of being unprepared again, and we would rather be in that space of resilience. And so, a lot of lessons learned that we can continue to pull from this unfolding pandemic, and again, how we come together with collective action in order to really make the future for our communities better.
Thank you so much. Stephen, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, thank you. And I think both of those answers were great answers, and I agree with both of you guys a lot. One of the opportunities that has come is to build a lot more local, right? COVID threatened supply chains, right? And once again, I go back towards the money. And so now companies have a vested interest to build locally. And so, instead of having shipping containers, and I don't know, some of the accounts I follow on Instagram, you'll see like something grown in Brazil is packaged in China and isn't consumed in San Diego, right? You're like, what is going on here? This doesn't make logical sense, but it's so cheap to ship things back and forth. So companies now are really looking local, looking how they can not ship as much. And it's not because of the environment, but it's because of that. So supply chain resilience, I think, is one of the big opportunities there. And something that Alvaro said is the opportunity to rethink business. COVID basically forced companies very quickly to change how they do business. And, a lot of companies thought, hey, September of 2021, we'll be back in doing things the way they were before. That's not the case. And so now companies really have to rethink how they do business. They really have to rethink how they look at an employee, how they look at consumers. Employees aren't going to campuses. So now companies have a vested interest to look outside of their four walls. How do we reduce our employees' emissions? What energy are our employees using, right? And that's one of the things I love about Common Energy too. It's really investing in a huge solar farm in Nevada when your operations is in New York is great for some reasons, but you're not connecting with your employees. You're not educating them. And so I think there's a real opportunity to educate employees, which drives the community change, which helps accelerate the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. And just overall think about, do you want people coming to campuses? I'm out here in Seattle, near Seattle, Washington. And everybody there's a arms race for building campuses, right? Microsoft is building this huge campus. They're like, oh, it's going to be LEED certified platinum, but the embodied carbon takes 250 years of operating for the amount of emissions they build that they're going to cause in the next 40 years for building it, right? So now companies get to rethink, is that how we want to do that? Do we want to help employees actually have more healthy homes, communities have more healthy transportation solutions? So I think for me, I think the opportunity is businesses rethinking how they do business and starting to look outside their four walls.
Amazing. Yeah, very cool. I'm loving all of these answers. I do want to move forward to our next question. Why is it important to focus on equity, inclusion, and accessibility while addressing the climate crisis? And how does your work specifically support these kind of values?
Yeah, happy to share first. I mean, climate change is absolutely an issue that we have to solve for everyone. And our current systems are highly inequitable, and they are not capable of producing those results that we need, which is a solution for everyone. We're already witnessing the impacts of climate change, and, solving climate now for us, maybe 20 years ago, it meant avoiding the worst, but now it means, really adapting and adaptation and mitigation at the same time. And what that requires is truly a mindset of equity and inclusion that we have to bring to all of this work when we think about the way that we are going to mitigate and adapt together. And we have to bring that lens of equity and inclusion first, because it's folks that have been traditionally marginalized, many countries, many folks within, we're talking from the US perspective here, that have, again, been marginalized from these continuous racist and oppressive policies that we've had in place, are the ones that are most affected by our climate crisis. And we just have to hold that at the front and center of our minds as we think about these solutions. I also think that most important that we have to focus on DEI, because I just talked about a lot of gloom and doom, but really what we have is an incredible opportunity here as well. And we have an opportunity where we can create community wealth through the solutions that we deploy. And, we can truly focus again on equity and justice when we think about how we're providing critical funding to the communities that need support and, in order to not just enact solutions, but to truly adapt to what is coming for our future. But I think, again, with that opportunity, there's a lot of incredible potential for creating true career paths in a new green economy for folks that really help to support that long-term community wealth building and really stop these cycles of oppression if we keep that lens of DEI front and center in our mind as we design these new programs and new businesses that are bringing forward our climate solutions.
Okay, can go in. So I think, for example, these kind of discussions are very important. I am from Global South, you are a company and an organization from Global North. That is very important to have these kind of conversations, consultations and stuff. And I think it's very important to avoid the Barbie savior syndrome that we are having now also in climate negotiations. We have in the past from missionaries, later we have this Barbie savior syndrome to going to Africa and spend a lot of money in you going there and taking a lot of photographs. And now we need to set an ideal of that the people from the place want to save their land. They know how to do it, but they need the money to do it. So we need to understand how we are going to try to pass them money in a safer way today to do what they need to do and not spend the half of the money just in consultants that are just visiting the place as tourists, because that is taking a lot of money of climate projects, just useless consultants a lot of times. Obviously, in some cases, the consultation is very useful and the research is very useful, but a lot of times we need to give more importance to equity, to look to these people from Global South and from, for example, for indigenous communities and for more poor communities, look them as equal people, because a lot of time we look them as objects of charity, and we need to understand that they are subjects that are in the same crisis that we are living, the climate crisis, and we need to solve together. We as a privileged people cannot go there and say we are going to save you, as we did with missionaries and with the Barbie savior syndrome. We need to do in another way. We need to bring these voices to climate conferences to hear them and hear their problems, to help them to solve it, but with them, not without them. We could not go and make a new Occidental West Indian company, for climate saving right now. We need to do different. We need to hear them, make them, try to help them to build more capacities, give them, for example, scholarships to take a master program in your country that is a privileged country, so they could help solve the problem in their own land. But we need to stop this Barbie savior syndrome that we are now adapting in climate spaces. I love Greta work, for example, but I hear a lot of other people from Global South saying the same stuff and not having the same press coverage. And that is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvaro. Yeah, very, very important stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stephen, do you have anything to add here?
There you go. I'm unmuted. Yes. So the question is, why is it important? I think it's important because if we don't change how we're acting, right, there's going to be a mass migration north. There's a lot of issues with how, as first world countries, we are just consuming, we're emitting, we're doing all these types of things. And to be honest, I'm out here in Seattle, like everybody said, I might have to buy an AC unit, right? But it's not going to really change how I live a ton based on what happens. And so one of the things that I think needs to happen, what Alvaro said I think is 100% correct too. We can't go out and tell everybody what their solutions are. We need to listen and hear what the solutions are. Again, I think individuals need to support the companies that are doing the right things when it comes to diversity and inclusion. It's actually very easy to see which companies are leading in this area. We also, I think, need to educate the high net worth individuals. One of the tactics that we're taking is we want to educate high net worth individuals how to reduce their impact, because they're the ones who generate 99% of the emissions, right? I think I saw a stat that said 1% of all air travelers generate 50% of all the emissions from traveling, right? And so we need to educate them on what the impact this is actually having throughout the world, how this is turning into flash floods that are wiping out communities in south of the hemisphere, so in the southern hemisphere. So I think a lot of it is around education and listening that we need to do, and it's going to be a huge problem for everybody if we don't listen and we're not trying to educate the right people.
Yeah, very, very true. Thank you so much all for sharing. Moving forward into our next question, which is kind of, Stephen began to touch on this. In order to meet our climate goals, we have to engage everybody in the conversation. So how can we move climate action forward across partisan lines?
I can jump in real quick here. I think thus far, climate action, when I even try to talk to my friends, and I know I'm on the old side of millennial, but when I try to talk to my friends, a lot of them are trying to think of the right word. They're like, yeah, but they don't really understand what the actual impact of this is. And a lot of what they've been brought up with is being preached at, right? You need to be vegan, you need to do these things. And it hasn't felt like an inclusive community of let's solve this problem together. Back to what Alvaro was saying, a lot of people feel like there's a small group of people saying, you need to do this is the right steps, but they're not asking people like, what steps are you ready to take? And so I think we really need to, again, listen more and really find out what people's values are. You'll be hard pressed to go out there and see if nobody cares about nature and the environment. Every single person I've ever talked to cares about nature and the environment. It's what do they care about and how do they see that? And so to me, it's listening and actually relating with people and then saying, hey, whether it's based on plastic waste or emissions, people don't want to see us destroying the environment. Now, this is my little bubble that I'm in. I don't see people. I'm sure there's people outside of me that are profiting off of agriculture and things like that probably don't care as much about the environment. But I really think it comes down to listening and then engaging people and finding out what their values are and how to align sustainability and climate action with their values.
Yeah, certainly agree with that, Stephen, and I'll maybe offer a aligned but different perspective. So I started my work on climate in primarily red states. I led a nonprofit in climate action with youth across the Southeast. And it was interesting conversations that always came up, but I found through that work that most of all, when you start talking about, and this is to your point, Stephen, when you start talking about the opportunities and begin localizing the conversation around the impacts that folks are seeing for themselves, people are really interested in talking. And, I say that I'm not naive. I know that the politics around climate in the last couple of years particularly have changed in a way that's challenging, but I still like to go back to really the numbers when I think about, climate as, is this really a partisan issue? And we see it from the Yale studies. They do this year over year. 70% of people believe climate change is real. 60% of people know that it's man-made. Yes, should that be 100% would be important. But I think even more important when you keep digging into those numbers is that you look across, for Republicans, more than 50% believe that we should be funding renewables and believe that we should be teaching about global warming in schools. So when we dig down, I think we see that there's a lot less actual difference than maybe media likes to think. So in that case, I really, I like to talk about this again in terms of people, not as a certain partisan issue or needing to bring a person from one side or the other, because since I like talking about the numbers right now, if you continue to dig in, you'll see that there are a lot of folks across all political spectrums that care about climate but are not taking action. And to me, that's the bigger challenge that we have here. It's not saying, yes, I care or not, it's whether I'm willing to do something about it. So I think that's where we need to get to. And to your point, Stephen, saying that, it's really engaging folks in conversations. So it's talking about climate, not debating it, telling them about something that's interesting that you saw or read. I think, it's also, again, about localizing the conversation. I think, being able to the impact and opportunity of Tennessee. Ford just announced they're investing billions of dollars in new EV factories, and they're going to create more than 6,000 jobs. And that's certainly a true solution that people are getting behind.
Yes, I think we need to connect with people because people are the voters, are the electors of the bipartisan system that you have. For example, in the US, the bipartisan system is not the direct election. Then I think it's wrong for many reasons to not have direct election. This electoral college, for me, seems to be just a control system and not very democratic, as democracy is the majority. So I have a problem with the origin of your political system. But I think the only way to transform this, as I already say, in a policy of the state, in the federal government in this case, but a policy of all the country and not just from one government to the other, can change everything, is through education, so the people start to vote in persons that care about climate. I think one of the biggest problems in the US is the big inequality in education. You have the best colleges in the world, and at the same time, you have a super high rate of people that drop college because they are not adapted to the language, because they are immigrants and they are discriminated during the system, because they don't have the money to pay it for college because it's crazy expensive. I could be rich here just for a career in the US. And you need to change your education system for being one based on science and not just in people believings, because I am a person that a faith person, but at the same time, I will not impose my faith in the school as you do in some schools in the US, in some states, because I take a change program in the US, and one time I encounter people that told to me that they don't believe in climate change as a believing stuff, and this is science. It's not in the believing part of your life as you're believing God or in energies or wherever you want. This is science, and science is to know, not to believe on it. So I think this is a basic problem of education inequality in the US. People with good education that actually understand science will be more able to be on the vaccine side, on the climate change side, on the earth is round side. People with lower education will be flat earth, anti-vaxxers, and that kind of stuff, and climate change is a host from the communist people and wherever they want to believe. But I think these believings are based on ignorance, and that ignorance only can be fight with education from the kindergarten or playgroup, wherever you call it there, to high school and through the university, and not just in debates. I think that is, I am with Regan in this. You could not be solving these problems with debates, because will be always endless debates with people saying yes, no, for many days, months, years now. We need to change this from the basic education. And for that, we need to have in the US, but also in the other countries, education that is based on science, STEAM, with more inclusion of gender there, with women's in STEAM. In the last years, we are seeing that women take better decisions in climate change than men's in power. So STEAM and the inclusion of women in science is the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of these comments. This has been such an amazing discussion. I have one more question, but we're kind of running short on time. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to our audience. I am just going to move forward into the conclusion of this event today. So here at Common Energy, we work with a climate mitigation strategy called Community Solar, which is a state program that incentivizes the addition of solar farms to local utility grids. It's not only a really great way to reduce our carbon emissions, but it also opens up the world of renewable energy to more people than ever before. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our impact team manager, Beth, whose birthday is actually today. And Beth is going to share some more information about what we do with Community Solar.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much for passing that my way, Natalie. And also thank you again to the panelists. Again, that was like a really awesome conversation to be able to sit through. But great, yes, moving forward, community solar is a new form of clean energy that allows for households to connect to local community solar farms without the cost of rooftop installation. As many as you probably know, community solar farms can create clean electricity by converting energy from the sun into electricity using photovoltaic cells. The energy from these farms can then be connected to the utility, where it can be used in place of fossil fuels. From the utility, this clean electricity then enters the local grid as normal and flows to all consumers, including homes, apartment buildings, businesses, schools, etc. Households that decide to participate in this greening of the grid process will receive savings on their monthly utility bill as an incentive from the state to divest from fossil fuels. So there are so many reasons why you can sign up, why you can and should sign up today. The first of these being the positive environmental impact that you as an individual can make. By signing up with Common Energy, you can prevent approximately 100,000 pounds of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere every single year, which is the equivalent of planting 20 trees. Not only will you be taking a step away from fossil fuels, but you'll be saving money every single month by participating. Signing up is free and really easy to do, and you can participate even if you rent your home. If you pay the utility bill, you can qualify for this program, and that's why I love it so much. It's super equitable and a free way for people from all walks of life to get involved in clean energy. You can also cancel at any time if you decide the program isn't for you. There are no long-term contracts or hidden fees here, just a shared passion for creating a healthier planet and future. We are active in the 9 states listed here. And if you feel ready to enable clean energy to enter the grid for free, go ahead and get signed up with the link below. We'll be posting it in the chat as well. And I think we would also be happy to stay on after the call if there are any questions. But with that, on behalf of the Common Energy Impact Team, thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion. These climate change discussions are so educational and important, and I'm so grateful that we can share the same goal of equitable climate mitigation. Our next installation of the COP26 Climate Action Marathon will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on October 14th, and we will be discussing the findings and warnings of the most recent IPCC report. Thank you again to our speakers and audience for your participation today, and we look forward to continuing this discussion at our next event. In the meantime, if you have any questions about this event or our upcoming series, please email Natalie at natalie.lana@commonenergy.eu. And again, thank you all so much for coming today.
Yes, thank you. This is the conclusion of our event. Again, thank you so much to our speakers. We had some amazing discussions today. Really looking forward to sharing this with the rest of our network. And for our speakers, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with our audience before we close out today? Yes.
Sorry. First of all, thank you for having me today. I am very grateful. I think having people from Global North and Global South in the events always help to open our minds and open our comments to different views, different point of views. And that is always better because we came from very different backgrounds, but these backgrounds can put us together, and that is the important. And we came together to solve this crisis between everyone, with everyone on board, and with the power of the people, but also with companies, with governments, with consumers. The consumers changing will be very important in the next days, in the next years of action. And also, I think these kind of projects are as community energy will help to solve this crisis, because it's a local action that is very impactful in people. And we need to replicate this in other countries, then understand that the local energy production will reduce carbon emissions and carbon footprint of every individual. So this is very good. And I think this kind of project need to be more spreaded. And I hope to see some of you on COP26. We are going to fight for the rights of civil society to participation there. I start this in COP25. I was also doing this. I was the general coordinator of COI, that is the conference of youth previous to COP, and prepare youth people to be more effective on COP. This year, also they are going to have a COP COI 16 that is in Glasgow also before the COP. So I think all these opportunities are good for staying engaged and to be more prepared and more effective in the conferences. And if you could help people from Global South to go, do it in your community or wherever you could help them. Is always very good to have IPO people, BIPOC people present in the conferences. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro, for joining us, and this is a great conversation. Thank you to the Impact team for coordinating this. I think I'll just leave with reiterating that number of thoughts, which is really to believe in the power that you all have as individuals to really hold our important change makers accountable, and by doing that, recognizing that you are the most powerful change maker that we have. So, again, using your choices as both the consumer, and I don't just mean, not buying plastic, but really, where you choose to get your power from, whether it's signing up for community solar, whatnot, to really hold our corporates accountable and hold our elected officials accountable. If you're in the US right now, I can't not leave without saying this. Call your senators. It is time to call for climate. Call them today and then call them again on Monday, because they're going to have quite the next 48 hours. But we have really big things to do, and where, yes, we can't leave it up to the federal government and agree on that. We do need their partnership in this. We need to hold them accountable on it, because what we see occur in the next week, 2 weeks in the US is directly going to affect the level of ambition that the US brings into the COP climate negotiations when we get to Glasgow. So I'll leave you with call your senators.
Yep. And I'll jump in and say thank you very much too. It's been a pleasure being here. And yeah, reiterating what's already been said, but you guys, we are the power, right? So the individuals have the decisions, who you work for, where you buy from, make the decisions wisely. And there's so many different programs you can sign up to make calling easy. You can make it so I can send a letter with 2 presses of a button. I don't even need to write anything out, right? So spend the time, learn your carbon footprint, learn how much waste you generate, learn those things, and then you can educate others too. Once it starts with you as an individual, and then it starts as, without being preachy, going out and saying, hey, did you know these different things? And really educating others and having that dialogue. So yeah, thank you again for having me. It's been fun.
Awesome. thank you so much for everyone coming out today. And thank you to our speakers again. I think this has been a really great call. Definitely make sure to call your senators, take local action however you can. As Reagan said, these next 2 weeks are going to be extremely important in terms of United States ambition within COP26. So yeah, we will definitely be sending some more resources. Thank you, Reagan, for sending that link to Call for Climate. Definitely want to encourage everyone to participate as much as we can, do what we can to mitigate climate solutions within our own communities. Great. So if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to email me at natalie.lana@commonenergy.us. Lauren sent it in the chat. I'll send it again. But I don't want to take up any more of your very, very valuable time. Thank you so much for coming out today. And I hope to see you at our next webinar on October 14th. Hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Bye.